people with high EQ and high empathy and anxiety, they can pull themselves out of that and tap into and use that same system for their own individual benefit. And now they're the puppet master. You can now create artificial relationships. You now know the method for manipulating people to do what you want them to do. There you go.
And that's how you get anything you want from anybody.
Correct. In business, mental health, physical health, social friendships, and more. It should absolutely be illegal. It should be totally outlawed.
So what's your perception of me?
That you try very hard.
Thank you.
That is my perception. But I mean, even just since arriving here, right? Like you've got nervous energy, and then you can see in like the pace of your breathing and the pace of your speaking that you also have some nervous energy going on.
I'm really excited to talk to you. But one of the first questions I was going to ask you kind of hit it on the head. How do I stop this from happening in the future for future guests?
When there's a high level of excitement, usually it's because there's a high level of anticipation. There's a story essentially that you're kind of telling yourself, whether that person is so cool or that person is so smart. So what's happening is momentum of your energy front load the actual experience itself. So the same thing happens when you have a guest on your show. The same thing happens if you're getting ready for a big interview. Journalists have to suffer this all the time, right? Imagine being a journalist that gets to have an interview with Putin, or a journalist that gets to sit down with Biden. That's not the kind of thing that you get to do every 2 weeks, right? So there's all this anticipation and this anticipatory energy that they have to overcome so that they don't start the interview strong or with high energy and then end the interview low.
Are there methods to prevent that?
Yes. So what you have to do is you basically have to inoculate yourself against the momentum of energy. Sometimes we call it stress inoculation. So there's two types of stress, mental, like brain stress. There's distress and there's eustress. Distress is the stress that we all know and hate. The loathing and the not looking forward to something and the feeling like the world is crushing you down, that's all distress. Eustress is all the positive stress, like when there's change that results in more energy, or when there's anticipation, or when there's some sort of enthusiasm. That's also stressful. Like it increases your heart rate, increases your cortisol levels, increases your body temperature. It's the same effect as normal stress, but it has a different cognitive impact because of how it triggers more energy in a different way. So you have to stress inoculate against what you're getting ready to do. So for example, you can role play. I'm interviewing Putin next week. Can you pretend to be Putin?
So you practice the intro.
And then you sit with them and you're like, I'm going to start with this question and then this question and this question. If your role player is very good at being a role player, which many people need some practice, right? But if they're very good at being a role player, they will put themselves into the role because they know that it's helping you. And then if you go through 3, 5, 12 practice questions, 2 or 3 different intros, by the time Putin actually walks through the door, you're like, oh, you're just kind of a funny little man instead of this larger-than-life character.
Yeah. Okay. So role-playing would be the number one suggestion.
Role-playing is the number one suggestion. And then the number 2 is actually to rehearse out loud. It can be into the mirror. It can be into the absolute ether, the darkness of your room, whatever you want. Because what happens is there's a brain-mouth muscle connection that often people overlook. Why are soccer players good at soccer? They have muscle memory. Why are football and soccer, depending on what country you're in, the same? Why are American football players so good at American football? Why are tennis players so good at tennis? Why are golfers so good at golf? Part of it is because of muscle memory. Their body, their hands, their arms, their shoulders, their hips remember the motion, the movement, the stroke, the position, right? That's just muscle memory, training over and over again. We have the same problem with our mouths. If you don't know what question you're going to say, or if you know what question you're going to say, but you've never practiced saying it out loud, there is no mind-muscle connection for your lips. So you can stumble over yourself. You can say it too fast. When you see people clarify over and over again, often it's because they know they're not being clear. So you got to build that routine. So when you have a role player, you do both skills at once, right? You inoculate against the stress, and you build the brain-mouth muscle connection. If you don't have a role player, you can't inoculate against the stress, but you can still build the brain-mouth muscle connection.
Interesting. So a lot like a presentation, you'd want to go before you go on a stage. You just want to do the same process. So then, but this is a one-on-one conversation. So you need to practice what you're going to ask. This is a formal interview, but I guess you could still practice if you're going up to a girl before you talk to her.
What's funny is if you've ever met pickup artists, have you ever met an actual pickup artist, like real pickup artists, people who pride themselves on the art of pickup, do all the things that we're talking about. They role play with their boys. They practice lines. They practice pickups. They practice
And they do some research ahead of time to know what to
absolutely.
ask.
They have like go-to tricks and tools. It sounds ridiculous, except that it works. If it didn't work, it would make the practice ridiculous. But because it works, the practice therefore is not so ridiculous.
Interesting. So if you do meet the person and you got past your rehearsed scene, how would you go ahead and gain perspective on that person, that individual?
The whole reason that you practice beforehand is because, let's say you practice 5 questions, right? This is something that we call a conversation map.
Okay.
If you imagine, you've seen people create flowcharts in the past, right? Like you do this and it goes to this, it goes to that, and then you have a yes/no situation. If they say yes, it goes this direction. If they say no, it goes this direction. You've seen flowcharts.
For sure.
A conversation map is a tool that we use in intelligence collection that is essentially a flowchart for a conversation.
Interesting.
So I ask you the question, hey, how's your day going?
Good.
There's really only 2 options, right? There's some sort of positive response. It's good, I'm happy, right? Or there's some sort of negative response. Oh, it sucks, it's horrible. When you actually build a conversation map, you can also like scope out the fact, oh, probably a 70% chance you're going to say it's good, even if it's not good, because culturally we say it's good. 20% chance you're going to say it's bad. Well, there's still 10% not accounted for. So then we also have to build out the neutral response. What if you get a neutral response? What if you get a response like, I'm not sure yet? Or I'll find out later. Like that's an unexpected response that still has some probability of occurring. Well, if you only plan, first of all, if you don't plan for the conversation at all, after you ask the first question,
you're done.
Yeah. How's your day? It's good. Okay. I don't know what to say next.
Yeah.
So a conversation map gives you the opportunity to know exactly what you're going to say next in all 3 situations. So if you say, oh, my day is good, then my next step in the conversation map is going to be like, what makes it good? If you say your day sucks, my next step in the conversation map is going to be like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What makes it bad? If your answer is something neutral, maybe my next step in the conversation map is to say, oh, what would make it a better day? Now, I'm now 2 questions ahead of your responses. If I can build myself 3, 4, 5 questions ahead, which is surprisingly easy when you actually think about it, when you literally draw it on a piece of paper, here's my first question, draw it in a circle. Here are the 2 or 3 most likely responses. Here are the 2 or 3 most likely responses from each of those, et cetera, et cetera. You can get about 5 questions deep. The reason you do that is so that when you actually meet the person and you start the conversation map, you only need 30% of your mental capacity to keep up with the conversation. The other 70% is going into what we call personal assessment, which is creating the baseline about that person's behavior in that moment in time. So then by the time you get through question 4 and 5 and you've got 5 responses worth of input, now you start making up new questions. Now you start engaging in what we would call a deliberate dialogue, an exchange of information. And through that process, now you have more information about the other person because you've got all of their data that they've shared, plus all of your assessment data that you've picked up through their tone and their physical movements and their body language. Let's say that we're talking to somebody that we met at a fundraising event, and we went to that fundraising event specifically so we could network with business leaders and community leaders.
Okay.
All right? So you already know going into that room what time of day it is. It's probably nighttime. You know that they're going to have hors d'oeuvres and a meal. You know everyone's going to be there for probably 2.5 to 3 hours because it's a fundraiser. There's going to be speakers on stage. There's going to be music. There's going to be tables. There's going to be all this stuff. Everybody's dressed in suits, ties, or something that they think looks like relatively formal wear, fashionable formal wear. So that's the scenario.
Okay.
Let's build the first 5 questions. All right. The first question is very likely going to be either hello or something that about an introduction, because that's why everybody's there. So your first question might actually be, hi, my name's Andy, or hi, my name's Adam, right? Hi, my name's Andy. I am with Everyday Spy. What are you doing here? You have no idea who the person is, right? But you do know that in this room, you're going to have to talk to people, and people are there to talk to people. So you know that you can get away with a conversation starter that's something as simple as, my name's Andy. What's your name? So one response is they're going to say their name. What's another response?
You say, who are you?
Yeah. So my name's Andy. I'm with Everyday Spy.
I'm the host of the party, like a category way of explaining themselves.
So this is why a conversation map is so powerful, right? We all assume that they're going to answer our question. Some people won't, right? Some people might say something like, "Oh, I'm nobody. I'm just here with my wife."
Aha, okay.
Right? "Oh, I'm nobody. I'm a driver." Oh, you don't. I'm not anybody important, man. I'm just the waiter, right? Oh, I'm part of the sound team, right? You might get a response like that. So you have to have a planned response for that, right? So you've got the peer response, essentially. Oh, I'm Brett. I'm a YouTuber. Oh, cool. Now we're past the first question. Then you've got the person that's like, oh, you don't want to talk to me, man. I'm nobody. I'm just Joe's driver. You have to have a plan for that kind of response too. And then you also have to have the response for somebody who's being like unexpected, snarky, somebody who's being funny. I don't know how many comedians you know, but a lot of times they will turn a situation on their head just to freak you out, right? So they'll be like, none of your business. What's your name? You've got to have at least those 3 responses planned for. Otherwise, you're going to get wigged out.
But you're choosing these based on the social situation. And since that's a networking event.
And the probability.
That would be, okay,
So it's most probable in a networking event that people are going to be cooperative.
That's interesting.
It's also possible at a networking event that you'll talk to somebody who's part of the event staff or part of the secondary staff. It's also possible that you'll talk to somebody who's trying to be countercultural because that is their tool for networking. So you have to, and there's 5 or 7 or 12 other circumstances that might happen too, but let's be ready for those 3. I don't think you have to be ready for the person who doesn't speak English. Because that person might be there too. I don't think you have to be ready for the person who's got a stomach ache, but that person might be there too, right? Those are all lower probabilities. It's not worth planning for that outcome. But now we're only one question deep into this, right? Who are you? Now we find out their name. So now what's your next question? So if you find out that somebody's, if you plan for a positive peer response, hi, my name's Andy, or my name's Brett, or my name's John, or my name's Jake, or Adam, or whatever else. Hi, that's my name. Okay. What's our next question for that person? But also, what's our next question for the person who says I'm nobody? And what's our next question for the person who says, aren't you being nosy? Who are you? Like, what's our next response in each of those 3 cases?
And you're just mapping it out based off of the complete environment you're going into.
So let's go through the exercise.
Okay.
Let's just do 2 or 3 questions. But now you're seeing it's not an easy process.
So if it's your name, you could say, how are you doing?
Okay.
Second one could be, do you like the job, or what do you specifically do? Get interested in them. And then the third one could be, I don't know, you'd probably have to be quick. I don't even know. That one would be hard. I wouldn't be ready for that. Yeah.
Now you're understanding why it is that intelligence officers spend so much time planning before they ever put themselves in an operation. Right? Because here's what's interesting. All 3 of those potential outcomes from the first question, I'm Andy, who are you? All 3 outcomes could be people of interest.
Gotcha.
Right? What if it's the driver of, like we're in Phoenix right now, what if it's the driver of the governor of Phoenix? Now you are one step removed from the governor of Phoenix. What if it's the driver to the CEO of Boeing Aerospace? Now you're one step removed from the CEO of Boeing Aerospace. Like these are important people. They may not think they're important. They might think they're just a waiter or a driver or a gardener or whatever else.
Their access. Interesting.
You have no other way of getting to the Boeing CEO in your network than that person right now. So you've got to be prepared to maximize that opportunity with that person. We have a saying at CIA, we say, everybody is worth a cup of coffee. Everybody's worth a cup of coffee. It's one of the big reasons why whenever I get an invitation to be on a podcast, I don't just say no, because everybody's worth a cup of coffee. You never know what that person might say, do, or be connected to in some way that can benefit or help or assist you now or in the future. So you've got to give everybody a shot. You've got to give everybody equal treatment. You can't just go someplace thinking, I am only here to talk to the super hot blonde chicks. That's it. They have to be, between 25 and 28 years old, and they have to be like platinum blonde with long hair past their shoulders, and they have to be dressed to impress. For all you know, like it's the brunette who's at that party, who's funny and giggly and whatever else, whose best friend outside of that party is exactly what you're looking for.
So you're going to limit your future options too.
Correct. There's an opportunity cost to what you choose to do right now.
Okay, fascinating. The coolest thing you just said was that when you do this, not just to be prepared and have a good impression, but so you can limit processing power in your brain, so then you can actually kind of try to read their emotional state, pick up on their ideals, and try to see if they're anxious looking over their shoulder. You're trying to get completely different reads, so it limits your ability to worry about those initial few conversations.
Correct. What you're doing is you're front-loading your repetitive tasks so that you can leave space to process through real-time tasks. And there's so much that we do that's repetitive. Most conversations that we have are repetitive. So why let ourselves use our active RAM, if you will, to process through simple shit? Instead, save the RAM for the good stuff, and then like just automate the other stuff. You've got tons of brain, mouth, muscle memory for things like how are you, what's your name, how's your day. That shit's automatic. Nobody stutters over those words.
Yeah, okay. So most people in the world are self-interested. I'd say everybody is self-interested. And so a lot of times they're going into these conversations thinking about like what's in it for themselves. And I think the CIA has kind of identified that in human beings, studied it, mastered it, and now weaponizes it against people in a way for their benefit. Yeah. I'm really objective. I want to have the most like objective conversation with you. And if I feel like I'm going to say things that are going to come off like really like not okay in the world, but I feel like that's how the CIA talks, and so I would much rather be as like objective as possible here. Like you guys are trained to get your desired outcome from a human being, get information out of them, and use tactics and use their psychology against them. Yeah.
So you're using words like weaponize and against. You're using these very incendiary or alarmist terms.
Alarmist, huh?
Because think about what it feels like to be the person who's hearing the words that you're saying, right? Use it against you. Well, against implies that it's not in your best interest. It's not in the target's best interest. And against also implies that it's against the will of the target. Everybody makes fun of car salespeople, right? Car salesmen. But in reality, people want to buy cars. Like nobody walks into a car dealership not fucking wanting to buy a car.
Yeah.
So why is it that the salespeople have such a negative reputation of being like slimy and scammy and tricky and all this other stuff for somebody who wants to buy the thing that they showed up to buy? It's not that the salesperson is scammy or slimy. It's that the sales process rubs the target, right? The would-be consumer or customer. The sales process rubs the customer the wrong way. It makes the customer feel like they don't have control. It makes the customer feel like they have to acquiesce. It makes the customer feel like they have to compromise. That's how anybody who's ever wanted to buy XYZ car and ends up buying ABC car instead, that's why they're so disappointed. That's why there's buyer's remorse. What CIA has done is mastered the process of finding somebody who wants to buy XYZ car and then selling them XYZ car in as fast and as productive and as positive a way as possible. Because what CIA knows is if you help them buy one car once and it's fast, it's efficient, and it's fun, guess what happens the next time they want to buy a car?
You go to you.
Every single time.
And so you want them to feel happy about giving you information.
So the whole idea of weaponizing their personality against them is exactly the opposite of what we do.
Well, you don't let them know that, but in a way, like, so it's like I see people around in my life, like they're just completely emotionally manipulating each other back and forth in relationships. I do this, that means you have to buy me this thing. You bought me this thing, now that means you have to let me play a video game tonight or whatever it is. But they aren't aware of it. And so the CIA is just hyper aware of what X leads to Y and Y leads to Z through a psychology map, basically.
Yeah, because you're totally right. People go through life doing what we call, they have reactive conversations.
Okay.
Right? They have reactive relationships. Meaning, like, I'm friends with you for some reason, and you're friends with me for some reason.
Yeah, it's mutually beneficial.
But we've probably not even talked about what that reason is.
Yeah.
Right? Am I friends with you because you're funny and you're cool and you like the same video games? Maybe. But chances are that's not the real reason why I like being around you. The real reason is probably something like, I don't feel like you judge me. Or the real reason is because you also have a job that starts at 11 o'clock at night. So you're like the only person I can hang out with at 2 o'clock in the afternoon who's not at a job. Like, it's very real. Just like you said, we all operate in our own self-interest. The reason that we're friends in some way, shape, or form is tied to my self-interest. So all CIA does is it says, hey, pause, time out. In a reactive conversation or a reactive relationship between two people, the person who stops reacting and starts observing is going to be the person who is in control of the rest of that relationship or the rest of that conversation. If you stay reactive, there's two risks. The first risk is that it's never efficient. So you lose all this opportunity because it's not efficient. But the bigger risk is that the other person is the one that's going to stop reacting and start observing first. And once that happens, they're in control. So what CIA does is it just says, hey, this is simple. There's really only two outcomes. You're either in control or you're out of control. It's up to you which one you want to be.
So you said something interesting on Tom Bilyeu's podcast where it was like 98% of people are trapped in their own perception. 2% are living in reality.
Correct.
So those 2% that are living in reality, do they not have the ability to like just completely manipulate other people's worldviews?
Mm-hmm, they do.
And control their outcomes for their own benefit?
That's exactly what they have, yeah.
So then how do you identify, if you're in reality, how would you identify someone else who's in reality, knowing that people that are both in reality know how to make themselves be perceived as they are not in reality? It's politics, I guess I'm asking, where people will, maybe this is two separate concepts, so I'll let you think on that one. But second one could be politics. People go up on stage, they say words that make them look good and sound good to the public, and you can't refute those words, but what they're actually conveying with an underlying message is for their own self-interest. Like they could say, this is for climate change, but they actually have a business that could financially benefit from the means of production for climate change.
I mean, really what you just brought up in those two questions was like 4 or 5 different concepts.
Okay.
But you're...
This is actually what I want to talk about. So
I'm glad, man, because what you're doing is you're putting into words and into this real experience what most of us feel.
Yeah.
The hard thing about being a human being is that we feel much, much more than we think. I mean, think about it. You have 5 senses, but you only have one rational brain. So you can see why you would feel so much more information than what you rationally think.
Yeah.
But the problem is, while we feel all this information, while we feel so much, we then start to think that because we feel, we are rationally correct. And the opposite is true, right? There's only one rational brain working to try to make sense out of all 5 of your senses. What you see, what you hear, what you taste, and that's just real time. Like in this exact moment, there's a temperature on our skin that we feel. There's a smell in the air that we smell. There's a certain level of lighting, right? Like I see you and your background. You see something totally different when you look at me and see my background. And this is just the real moment. What's also processing through our brain is what just happened 5 seconds ago, 2 minutes ago, 2 hours ago, 2 days ago. The brain is processing all of that also. So there's this incredible amount of information and only one brain to rationally process it. That's why people don't have patience to let their brain process. They make these radical assumptions based off of their feelings. So when you start talking about people who are in control, the 2% of people who are in control of their brain, or people who live in what we term to be reality, right? Really what that means is they live in a world of perspective, not a world of perception. Perception means this is what my 5 senses tell me. It's how I perceive the world, and therefore it's true. How you perceive the world is not true. It's true to you only based on what you've perceived. You could sit in this room and perceive that you're safe, but there could be a car that's getting ready to drive by and shoot through the windows, right? You were wrong. So you could perceive that you're safe and not actually be safe. Yeah. You can feel safe and not actually be safe. All that the 2% of people do who live in a world of perspective is they're able to actually create assessment-based objective conclusions off of multiple data sources in addition to their 5 senses. So now it's like, oh, well, I know what the crime rate looks like in this neighborhood on this day, this time of year on average. I know that there's more crime or less crime when it's this temperature or that temperature, right? So now we're building an assessment of how likely it is that someone's going to drive by and shoot through these windows. That's an extreme example. The same thing's true. You sit at a negotiation table, right? Car salesman, again, if you sit down to negotiate with a car salesman on the 5th day of the month, guess how much leverage you have? Almost none, because they have a whole month to meet their quota. But if you sit down with a car salesman on the 29th day of the month, guess how much leverage you have? A shit ton more, right? Living in an objective world where you are living in your perspective means that you're thinking about your schedule and the salesman's schedule and the manager, the general manager of the car dealerships world. And you're living in the CEO's world because guess what? You sit in a Ford dealership to make a deal on the 5th day of the first month of a quarter. You've got the least amount of leverage of all. You sit in the same seat the last day of a quarter, you have the most leverage of all, right? Because everybody's pushing the last week of the last quarter, the last week of the last month of the last quarter of the year. You have an incredible amount of leverage.
So it's almost like the more variables you understand about the other party, if you understand their incentive, you have more intel.
That's exactly right. That's what I mean. That's when we talk about perspective, that's what we're saying. Here is where most people live, in their little friggin' world of their five senses, where they believe the whole world revolves around them. And we've all been there, and we all know what that's like, and some of us are probably still in that position, regardless. Whether you've been in that position and you are no longer in that position, or if you're in that position right now, one thing you know for sure is that you're the asshole. You know it.
They typically don't know that they're in that position in the first place.
But they still know that they're the asshole, right? Because when they look at somebody else and that other person does the same thing they're doing, what do we say?
Validates them.
That person's an asshole over there, right? So when you live in this tiny little world, you're giving up all the opportunity costs, all the space, all the advantage to the 2 or 3 or 5% of people who have given up on being the asshole. And now they're the puppet master. They're the actual, what you might term, using your alarmist rhetoric, they're the bad guy.
Alarmist rhetoric. That's funny.
But that's so, now on top of that foundation, that's where you start talking about, here's how politicians execute on that. Here's how heads of governments and heads of state or heads of businesses leverage that. Here's how covert officers who are building influence campaigns, here's how they leverage that. It's all the same concept foundationally. Influence
campaign, that's a cool word.
Yeah, so an influence campaign is when you were talking about politicians get up on stage and they say certain words, but there's an underlying meaning.
Like their effective truth, yeah.
Right? When it comes to an influence campaign, that's really all you're doing is you're choosing the right medium. That medium might be words. That medium might be pictures. That medium might be videos. It might be music. You choose a medium to communicate a message of some sort. That message that you want the medium to communicate is always emotional. We call that messaging. You've heard everybody talk about there's a narrative, the narrative of this, the narrative of that. It shows how ignorant people are in their little tiny space, because narrative is actually the second step. Most people talk about narrative if it's the first step, right? Oh, that dude's up there spouting lies and he's building a narrative. The narrative is not something that somebody else builds. The message is something that somebody else builds. So I know that you are sensitive towards the plight of dolphins.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start making a series of emotional messages all about why we need to save the dolphins. How sad is it to see the dolphins in a fishing net? Did you know that oil spills hurt dolphins? Did you know that dolphins are suffering from the impact of plastics in the ocean? Like 3 or 4 or 5 messages. All messages are triggering your emotions, right? And your emotions are outrage and anger and frustration and impotence and all sorts of feelings that you're having because you can't save the dolphins. Well, then there's a narrative that's formed.
How to act.
The narrative is your rational conclusion based off of all these messages. What's the narrative? The poor dolphins. Humans need to protect the dolphins. That's the narrative.
I see.
Well, guess what? Humans don't need to fucking protect the dolphins. The dolphins were there long before we were here. They will be here long after we are gone. Dolphins don't blow themselves up with nuclear weapons, right? But that's how a narrative forms. A narrative is actually not formed by some influence campaign manager or some political campaign manager. It's built by the audience themselves in response to the multiple emotional messages that they've been fed.
So you prime them with messages. Then you understand that the obvious conclusion from the herd would say this general thesis.
Correct, because what will most likely happen, what happens over and over again, is that the popular narrative, the most popular narrative is aired and shaped by the people themselves. So you start to see slogans, you start to see bylines, you start to see headlines that come from news agencies or that come from nonprofits or that come from whatever, right? Come from social media where they, the audience themselves, adopt their own stated narrative in response to the messaging that you've put out there.
So is that important when you guys are going on if you have a target in a different country, to lay that down culturally before you meet this person to play into it?
Close. It's already there. So
you identify what's already happening.
And then you fit into that.
Gotcha.
That's something that people get wrong because the movies make it look like, like somehow CIA is so smart that it can seed an idea and then cultivate that idea and create a movement in a foreign country. We're not that smart. We're smart enough to find that there's 12 different movements already at play, and this one is the best one for us to manipulate. So let's give a little bit of extra resources to this one movement and then enter through there, right? Because it's already there. It's the same thing the Russians did to us in 2016 when Facebook was talking about how...
Was it Data Analytica or...
Right, like all the Russian influence campaigns in Facebook. I mean, Russia's been doing that forever. It's just they got caught on Facebook in 2016. They've been doing it for a long, long time, and they do it because they follow the same methodology that we follow. There's two opposing groups or more, and you fund both sides. You give both of them false advertising. You create bots for both of them. You create campaign donations for both of them and shell companies for both of them, because what you really want is chaos. Because chaos makes all the other people question the process. And if you're somebody like China or Russia or North Korea, all you want people to do is question the process of democracy. That's how you kill a democracy.
William Proctor and James Gamble, Henry Wells and Williams Fargo, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. 3 successful business partners who got it done. What about the perfect partner for growing your business? That's you and Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online store stage to the first real life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify is there to help you grow. What I love about Shopify is that no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. And Shopify is the global force behind Rothy's, Allbirds, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size in 175 different countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. With one of the easiest drag-and-drop website builders and thousands of free integrations, Shopify is there to help you start your first business or grow your current one. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial at shopify.com/WGMI. That's all lowercase. That's shopify.com/WGMI. Thank you for sponsoring today's episode.
The thing that's so powerful is if I can build an artificial relationship with you, it's only artificial to me. It's very real to you. The reason that we've been successful in business is because we have taken espionage concepts and we have applied them to marketing so that we can create a simulated one-to-many artificial relationships. So the millions of people out there who follow Everyday Spy feel like they have a personal relationship with me. They know my kids' names, and they know my wife, and they know where we went to school, and they've watched hours and hours of my conversations, and they get me, and they feel me, and they know me, and they like me, right? They feel like they know me. But they don't actually know me. But they know me enough that they feel comfortable investing in the products, in the teachings, in the skills. And then for a small contingent of them, they'll actually get closer and closer to the point where they start coming to our live training events, and then they will really meet me in person. And what's fascinating is how often people come to our live events and they meet me in person, and in person it either clicks or it doesn't click. And for the people who it clicks, like, we are off to the races and it's the sky's the limit. But for the people who it doesn't click, they can't help but wonder if there's something wrong with them or with me, because they felt for a long time like we had a relationship. Right?
Or like a anticipated perception of you, and there's a mismatch. Is there like a framework that you guys have for that, or a way you think to combat that? Like, if that person knows who you are and you're going to talk to them, how would you handle that conversation?
So first of all, just because someone knows who I am doesn't mean that I'm going to take my time to talk to them. And what's happening there, there's two things, right? If you want to dig into it in detail, what's happening there is there's a level of authority that has to be maintained, because it's a Greek term called pathos. You have to have power, authority over somebody else. And once you have that perceived authority over them, if you can either use it to perpetuate the myth of what they believe they understand about you, the mythos, or you can use it to break through the myth that they think they have about you and then demonstrate true connection, right? Which is ethos. Mm-hmm. So you've got different options about what you're going to do. When you're trying to maintain a business and scalability, and when you're trying to serve millions of people at one time, you have to lean on the mystery, the mythos. General Petraeus, David Petraeus, was the director at CIA for a period of time. And I was fortunate to be able to know him, work with him. He was a workout buddy. I was a workout buddy of his when we were there. And he would talk about this with me often. He would talk about how important it was to control the troops when he was CENTCOM commander, control the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq by letting them perpetuate a myth about him that wasn't true. And the myth was that the guy was like a machine. Like he would never sleep. He could work out all the time. Like he was a god.
PR, yeah.
And he was like, you got to let them carry on that myth, because carrying on that myth kept all of them on a consistent page. They were all on the same. They were congruent in what they believed to be true about the general, and it was positive. So whether they liked the idea of him being like super strong or whether they were intimidated by him being super strong, it didn't really matter. It kept all of them in line, working towards the same direction.
Did he plant that?
No, he didn't plant it. It just built. Like what happened is he really is awesome in the gym. He's a very, very fit guy. I'm totally blowing all your secrets here, David. He's a very, very fit guy in like 11 different exercises because he's been doing the same 11 exercises since he was like 35 years old every morning at the same time of the morning. So he's got these eagle push-ups that he does, and he's got this special kind of like abdominal exercise that he does, and he's got these leg lifts that he does, and he runs the same distance. Like he does the same shit every single day. And he's got 30 years of practice getting stronger and better, and it's like it's muscle memory to him. Well, when somebody comes in that doesn't do those exercises, he smokes you. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you got some 60-something-year-old guy who's just absolutely destroying you in sit-ups, and you're like, what's wrong with me? This guy's a god. Uh-huh. He didn't plant it. What happened is he was just himself, and then the mystery grew organically around him.
That's very fascinating. And then does he have to lean into it though when he's in person now, or just doesn't say anything? But
that's exactly why. That's to answer your question. People don't get a chance to talk to him. People don't get a chance to work out with him
on purpose.
Because the myth has to perpetuate. So when he goes down the street, he's got a security detail that keeps everybody away from him, so nobody gets to come up and talk to him, right? I was chosen to work out with him, not because I was like special or gifted, but just because when he was traveling through my region of the world, the senior officers in charge of me were like, Andy's in good shape. Send Andy to go work with General Petraeus. And then I would go work out with him with like 2 or 3 other people. Most of them were stronger than I was. But we all got to like hang out with him, and we all got to learn some of this mindset of his. So now I've taken that same concept and brought it to my company. So now we put information out, because guess what you can control? The information you put out. Where you lose control is when people start asking you questions. Mm-hmm. You lose control when people start applying what they believe to be what you said to what they already believe to be true.
Yeah.
Right? Like I was at the airport just yesterday.
That's weird, yeah.
At the airport yesterday, and some dude walked up to me, and he started asking me questions, and he was like older gentleman, like mid-50s. And he's like, oh, I know who you are from the podcast. Let me ask you just one quick question. And I'm like, okay, one quick question. I'm sitting here trying to text my wife to tell her I'm safe at the airport or whatever else. He's like, just real quick, what do you think is going to happen in November with Biden and Trump? It was right after the Biden and Trump debates. And I was like, oh, well, I think this, I think that, I think the other thing. And I was like, all right, it was great to meet you. And he's like, one more question.
Well, it doesn't stop.
He one more questioned me like 4 times until I was like, dude, I stopped to talk to you because you said you had one question. I've got to text my wife. I've got to get to my next flight. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude, but you got to let me scoot away. And then because of the mythos that we have created, the myth around Everyday Spy, right? As soon as I kind of cut him off and told him he had to be done, he was apologetic. And he was like, I've already taken too much of your time. I really appreciate it, man. You got a huge fan with me. I can't wait to talk to you again, and I'll see you on the next podcast, right? And he moved on. That's the power of perpetuating the myth. So people do it. It's common to see it. Like all the entrepreneurs that you see online, like your life is not great and easy and grand, but the image that you portray is always
perfect. Yeah.
Because we've got to perpetuate that myth. not because we're trying to lie to people, but because we need the message to resonate with the right people. And for the right people, they will also create a company and a brand that perpetuates a myth that it can't be touched.
Do you think that's better than... So you think it's much better to portray the best image of yourself online to keep that aspirational element to your content?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it's important to cultivate the best image of yourself online. I
Controlled?
think it's important to cultivate the real image of yourself.
Okay.
The real image of yourself. Just always be real, be authentic, be credible, be real. Because what will naturally happen is the people who are observing will start to build their own ideas, build their own myth.
And then lean into it. Gotcha.
Yes, you don't need to fake anything. But the problem is if you're not genuine and authentic, then over time you start to break down.
Yeah.
People start to see through it.
Yeah, and then it does the complete opposite. They start to feel like you're weird. Okay.
Right.
Interesting. So you used some alarmist rhetoric when you said artificial relationship. That sounded like some alarmist rhetoric to me.
Okay.
When you say an artificial relationship, what is the purpose of... Is that what you would be doing to a target?
Correct.
Yeah?
An artificial relationship, because compare it to what a real relationship is. What is a real relationship? The expectation in a real relationship is equality, transparency, honesty,
vulnerability. Yeah.
Vulnerability. In an artificial relationship, you still want vulnerability and honesty and connection, but only from one of the two people. I want you to have a real relationship with me, but I want to protect myself by having an artificial relationship with you. And that's because the information flow is supposed to flow from the target to the handling officer, not from the handling officer back to the target. And in a perfect case, one day I'm going to leave, but you're still going to have access to secrets. So when I leave, I want to be able to meet my buddy Jerry, who's also from CIA, and bring Jerry in and say, hey, Jerry, meet Brett. Let's have you guys. Brett likes pizza and football and whatever else.
You guys will kick it off. It's like a warm intro.
Correct. And now, Brett, now you have a real relationship with Jerry, but Jerry maintains an artificial relationship with you.
That is scary. But do they kind of recruit people who don't have anxiety and empathy?
The opposite.
They want high anxiety, high empathy?
Correct.
High empathy?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Because what you want is somebody who can build a relationship, what we call an artificial relationship. You want somebody who can build an artificial relationship very quickly. Somebody who puts the other, like an officer who can put their target at ease, give their target confidence, comfort.
Is that the order? Or is this like a...
No. Just these are the building blocks of what it takes to build a relationship, according to our artificial relationship idea.
If you are going for high empathetic people at the CIA, and you're going for an artificial relationship, like I don't see how that clashes. So how do they train you to be less empathetic?
They don't train you to be less empathetic.
So they want you to be a high EQ, high empathy person, and then go intentionally have an artificial relationship with someone.
Correct. And
how do you cope with that at night?
Here's why it works. Most highly empathetic person, like most people who are highly empathetic, don't like other people.
Yeah. I get it.
So how hard is it to artificially manipulate people when you already don't like them?
Okay, interesting.
Yes, you see, it goes against what you would naturally think. You would think that someone of high empathy is like vulnerable to being in meaningful relationships. They're not.
Yeah.
People who are highly empathetic actually dislike most people, but feel some sort of obligation to force themselves to be in relationships, oftentimes where they themselves are the ones who sacrifice the most.
Interesting.
Because they fall under a societal expectation. And society's expectation is you must have a best friend, you must love your mother, you must love your father, you must do this, you must obey your boss. There's
the shoulds.
The expectation that's put on us by society. Well, guess what society was built for? Dumb shits. Society was built for the average of the average of the average.
Yeah.
Somebody who's not very intelligent, who's not very motivated, who's not very talented, who's not very empathetic. Society was built for stupid fucks. Because that's what it takes to keep a government alive. It takes a whole army of stupid fucks paying taxes and doing a job they hate day in and day out all the time for the promise that one day they'll be able to retire. If you don't have that, you have fucking anarchy. So what CIA does is it reaches into the society of dumb fucks and it puts out tests to find highly empathetic, highly anxious people who are all suffering in the dumb fuckery of normal life. And then it says, hey, Brett, hey, Andy, hey, my wife's name is Jihi, hey, Jihi, we may have something that you guys are interested in. Would you like to come for an interview? And then during that interview, they'll ask you a few questions to basically confirm that you are not the same level of dumb fuck as everybody else. You're a different kind of broken, right? And then they'll put you through a psychological evaluation. And then after you've passed all of their batteries, then they will look at you and they'll be like, let me tell you the truth. The truth is society has been conditioned to be a bunch of dumb fucks. And we need that. Because without the dumb fucks, we don't have a tax base. We don't have a predictable population that we know is going to show up at 60% turnout rate to vote for the president every 4 years. Like, without that, we don't have a working society. But we would like for you to do this other job that is dangerous and high-performing, but the only people you're going to work with are other highly empathetic, high performers with anxiety like you. Would you like to do this job, or would you like to go back to the dumb fuck pool?
That's a hard choice. That's like such a perspective shift so fast.
That's how it works, man.
I can see the intensity would really like convince you too.
Exactly. And then once you're in there, then like they start changing their vocabulary because.
So they start harsh like that?
Oh yeah, they start harsh like that. They start harsh like that because they already know you can take it because they've put you through a personality battle.
And that's how you feel secretly.
They already know that secretly in your heart, that's how you feel. Yeah. Right? In your heart, you already suspect that this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. And then all they do is they
validate that,
And there's power there. And then once they validate it, then they change the terminology.
So smart.
So now it's not your high empathetic and your anxiety. Now instead, you're the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
You're gifted. You're talented.
Dude. They'd get my ass too. I can feel myself falling for it right now because your ego just starts going.
Exactly. Because highly empathetic people are very sensitive in that way too.
Yeah, and you feel like, damn.
It sucks, dude. Yeah. It sucks. And then, like I said, 7, 10, 12 years in, hopefully you have an experience where you're like, oh, shit, I've been twisted and manipulated the whole time, too.
With business, the less you spend on operations, on multiple systems, on fulfillment, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distributions, and borrowing, everything costs more. Netsuite helps you reduce all this. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With Netsuite, you reduce IT costs because Netsuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. It's accessed from anywhere. You cut the cost of managing multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all of your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move. So do the math and see how you'll profit with NetSuite. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended their one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/WGMI. That's netsuite.com/WGMI. Thank you, NetSuite, for sponsoring today's podcast.
The CIA brainwashes very heavily to make you think two things. One, that you could not possibly serve a more effective and higher purpose than by dedicating yourself to CIA, right? And it's hard. When you're the right kind of person to be recruited to CIA, and then you go to CIA, and then you're trained and you're undercover and you're traveling the world, it's hard to not think that you are the best and the best of the best. It's hard. It's hard to ever even think like, why would I ever do anything else? Like, this is what I do. I do the thing that people make movies about. I do the thing that everybody else wishes they could do. And they feed that mantra.
Yeah.
And then guess who all of your friends are? Other fucking people who do the same shit.
Yeah.
So when you guys all get together for like happy hour, which happens at the CIA instead of outside, you all sit there and you pat each other on the back and you stroke each other's egos all day long about how you're the best of the best of the best. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not until you reach a certain point in your career. You have to reach a certain point in your career and have certain career experiences where that bubble is burst, where you realize, oh, I'm not the best of the best. I'm a fucking chump that's very well trained who actually would fall for the idea that I'm better than everybody else. And now I'm trapped in this cycle where I don't have any actual marketable skills, right? Because espionage is not a marketable skill. Like what we do day to day at CIA to collect secrets is not marketable. It's espionage. Espionage is illegal everywhere in the world. Yeah. Espionage is illegal inside the United States. The only reason CIA officers are able to commit espionage is because we fall under the executive branch of government, and there's a carve-out from the president that says that if you work at CIA and execute espionage on behalf of the national security objectives set for you by your sworn supervisors, you cannot be held criminally accountable for your espionage acts. Even though that carve-out exists, it's still mandatory that we get professional liability insurance because the president also has plausible deniability. So at any point, if we do something and politics change, they can point a finger at us and be like, oh, Andrew Bustamante just committed espionage, and I need to fall back on professional liability insurance to be like, well, he's covered.
What?
That's what plausible deniability is all about. So just think about how fucking blind and egotistical you have to be to live in this world where you're like, I'm so important, I can be denied. Like I can be plausibly denied. It's fucked up, dude.
That's fascinating though. They can do it. I wonder if they identified it themselves to come up with that system first.
So this is what's cool about one of the things I love the most about espionage and why I believe so strongly in my company and what we teach. Mm-hmm. Espionage is not new. Mm-hmm. CIA is relatively new, but CIA learned from MI6. And MI6 has been around for a long time. And MI6 learned from, the echelons, the kingdoms before them, and the kingdoms before them learned from the pharaohs before them. So espionage, the stealing of secrets, and the stealing and the idea of operatives and deception and controlled lies and artificial relationships, this goes all the way back to like the pharaohs. The first documented instance of espionage was in 3100 BC when somebody on a court for a pharaoh stole something from that court to make friends with another court of a different pharaoh. This shit is old. It's been perfected by humankind for centuries. We just now get to apply it.
Crazy tools too.
To business and and society.
Interesting, dude. Are there like books on this that like you could like?
We write them. Like, this is how blue ocean our world is, man.
You guys have books?
Oh yeah.
Oh cool.
If you go to everydayspy.com, I have a whole shopping page. My business is really part e-commerce, part live events, part digital learning. That's essentially how we break down. And then we have corporate focus, and we have direct-to-consumer focus. We even have a direct-to-government education focus because we've had school districts. We've had school districts in New York, California, and Florida all be like, we want to take this and spread it to our student base, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, information is like the most valuable asset. It's literally what you guys do. And now you also have a course that can teach people or digital learning products. Do you do coaching? Is it like high ticket?
Coaching is the one thing. So coaching I did for a short period of time, but it's not scalable. Yeah. So I got out of coaching. I am in the process of certifying people in our content so that they can coach. Yeah. But for me, it's not there.
Gotcha. Interesting. So is it like a video platform?
We have videos, we have audio lessons, and then of course we have written lessons and quizzes that are just fully text-based.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to go back to the empathy thing. So once that happens, once you're like initiated through that process and they give you that frame, does that just like that justifies it in your mind to the point that you're just like solved on like the empathy side? Like you're like, okay, if these people give me permission to feel this way, then that's okay, and that's how you rationalize it internally?
Close. It's like 80% that. 80% of it is just you've always suspected it, because guess what else? I mean, high-performing, anxious, empathetic people also usually respect authority. So when a position of authority
don't get in trouble,
comes and validates what you've already suspected, you just accept it to be true. Right? It's the same reason that we did well in school. Right. Because some position of authority said, you understand algebra, good job. And then we're like, I must be good at math. So the same thing happens there. A position of authority comes in and says, hey, you've always suspected that this is the way the world works. You are correct. Here's the framework that explains it. And now we need you to use this framework to keep the country safe. The reason that it's so easy to justify it isn't only because it gets validated by a position of authority, but then you learn essentially that you have this weapon. You can now create artificial relationships. You now know the method for manipulating people to do what you want them to do. Well, then, like the Peter Parker in all of us is like, oh, with great power comes great responsibility. So then the authority figure is basically like, but don't worry, you're not going to use this against Americans. You're only going to use this against foreign adversaries, bad guys.
Yeah.
And now you're like, well, fuck yeah, we can use a weapon against a bad guy all day long. And it immediately dehumanizes the bad guy. Because guess what every bad guy is? Father, son, mother, daughter, aunt,
their worldview.
sister.
Yeah.
They have their worldview. They have their reality. They believe that what they're doing is the right thing too.
They're the good guy always, yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Here's a concept. When I leave this podcast, I'm going to be so worried about if I came off the right way to you, if I was rude for some reason, if that one moment of body language was bad. How do you combat that? Does the CIA tell you, I think there's this post-reflection worry in any situation. That's just an example I'm using for myself here. But after you talk to a person, the anxiety, you said your wife has anxiety, but the anxiety of after you talk to a target, if you're worried that you might have blown your cover or something.
So there's a framework. It's a super awesome framework, right? So empirically, there's a law out there called the 80-20 rule. I'm sure you know it, right? So of 100% of anything, it breaks into two groups, 80% of one majority, 20% of another majority, right? Or a minority, right? So the first thing to understand is the 80-20 rule applies to all of our personal interactions as well. So if we have a 2-hour interview, and that's the 100% of our time together is just that 2-hour interview, right? 50% of the time was just 1 hour. 20% of the time was what's 20% of 120 minutes? 24 minutes. So 24 minutes, according to the 80-20 rule, there will only be 24 minutes that I even remember. Out of the 120 minutes that we were together, there's only going to be 24 minutes that I remember. On top of that, we also have to layer on the idea that people overvalue their losses and undervalue their wins. It's another mental model that we know about, right? Well, so the losses and the wins that I'm undervaluing and overvaluing are not yours. They're mine. So of the 24 minutes that I remember,
I see.
The majority of those 24 minutes are going to be me remembering the losses that I had.
Yeah.
The things I screwed up on. That's exactly what you're talking about when you're people go back and they have that anxiety.
Exactly, yeah.
But if I'm worried about the 24 minutes that I sucked at, guess what you're also doing?
Mine that I sucked at. And then
you're not thinking about me.
We're not thinking about each other's, yeah.
So then 80-20 rule applies again. So now now in 24 minutes, 20% of 24 minutes, because we're only going to remember 24 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes is what we're going to remember of the other person. And in that 5 minutes of the other person, essentially we're going to remember what they did the best because we're going to overvalue their wins and undervalue our losses. That's something called a cognitive distortion, where you give people more credit than you give yourself for the same task. So just to recap, 120-minute conversation. Both of us are only really going to remember 24 minutes. And if of that 24 minutes...
We're thinking of ourselves.
We're bashing ourselves for 19 of those minutes. And for 5 of those minutes, we're remembering the highlights of what the other person did. Once you understand that, then you start to realize that every single dipshit that you meet out there, every single one of them, they're only remembering 20% of their last conversation with you, and by default, they're most likely going to remember the best parts, meaning the most emotionally charged moments.
It's like the saying that people remember how you made them feel, not what they say. That's
exactly right.
What that's encompassing.
So that doesn't mean that everybody remembers, because we all have plenty of situations where we remember people negatively. But that's because in that 5 minutes that we remember them, the most impactful thing they did was made us feel bad. You've made me feel good a number of times today.
I needed that. Thank you.
So the 5 minutes that I'm really going to remember of this conversation, until I watch the interview later, the 5 minutes are going to be, Brett laughed at this and he was kind about that and he was friendly about this and that guy made me feel good and I'll go back on his podcast. Right?
Okay.
That's how it's going to work. And the same thing is going to happen if you apply this framework to yourself.
Yeah.
When you leave, you're going to be like, oh, the 5 minutes I remember about Andy are he was this and he was that and he was this. And hopefully those are all good things, because the final framework for CIA is always to leave people with a positive taste in their mouth. Always. Because if somebody remembers you positively, you have 2 benefits. One, they're not going to remember you very long. We don't value our wins. We overvalue our losses, right? So if you have a positive experience with somebody, they're going to forget you faster. But when the time comes that you want to talk to them again or meet with them again, and they recall you in that moment, it will be a positive recollection. When you leave somebody negatively, it actually takes, empirically, cognitively, it takes people longer to forget a negative experience than for them to forget a positive experience. So now you are actually remembered longer if you give somebody a negative experience. And then when you come back to them in the future, what they recall is negative.
When you say leave, do you mean the sum total or the last thing you say?
The sum total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because again, the last thing you say. There is an element of cognitive value on the way you part rather than the way you meet, which goes completely in the face of any business lesson that has ever told you that first impressions are so important.
Yeah.
First impressions are not important. Last impressions are the impressions that last. That's what we always tell ourselves at CIA. Last impressions are the impressions that last. First impressions are a dime a dozen. You can fuck up the first impression all the time. But the last one is by far the most important compared to the first one. However, it's the sum total of how you make someone feel that really makes them remember you. Which is why if you've ever had a date where like it started awkward, there was some really fun stuff in the middle, but then by the end it fizzled out. It fizzled out, or somebody got called back home, or like, oh, your sister needs you, or oh, my mom needs me, and it's like a rushed end of a date. You still feel good about the date because you don't remember the end. You remember all the cool stuff in the middle. The same thing is true about any other conversation that we have.
Is there some sort of framework for, so let's say like there's someone who is really good at something. Everyone compliments them on that one thing. Let's say they always say you're so smart or whatever, but then they don't feel like they're a very nice person. So is there an insight or some sort of strategy or framework for identifying what someone's always known for, but then they secretly feel like they're insecure about one part of them, then complimenting that thing that they're insecure about? This is a random idea that hit me one time, so I don't know.
So it's a little disjointed, but I think I see what you're saying, right? What you're getting at is understanding that you're acknowledging the fact that people are not what they first seem to be.
Mm-hmm.
So if I talk to you and you appear very smart, chances are when anybody talks to you, you probably appear very smart.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we would call a public persona or a public life or an accepted public profile.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the tricky thing to understand, the framework that you're looking for is that what you present to the public, what all of us present to the public, is not who we really are. It's a persona that we've cultivated over time. So that's why when somebody tells you you're smart, you're probably like, that's not the first time I've heard that before. Like, lots of people think I'm smart. Whether or not you're insecure about being smart or not is irrelevant right now, because the public life that you present is a life where you are smart. It's what you have cultivated over time. Well, one ring beyond your public life is something called your private life.
Mm-hmm.
Your private life is where your 9-year girlfriend lives. Mm-hmm. She understands what you're actually like. She knows when you're worried or self-conscious, or she knows when you take off your shoes, your feet stink, or she knows that you only brush your teeth in the morning and at night, not in the middle of the day, or whatever else. That's all private life stuff. So you haven't cultivated a private life. Your private life is what you share with your closest, most endeared friends, partners, parents, et cetera, et cetera. It's who you really are when you take off the mask of your public life. Mm-hmm. But that's not who you really are still, because there's a third layer called your secret life. Your secret life is where all those insecurities hide, where those feelings of guilt hide, shame, all that, everything that you've ever been too embarrassed to even tell your partner. Because you're like, I know she's been my girlfriend for 9 years, but if I tell her this secret, she's going to leave me. That stuff lies and hiding in your secret life. And we all have a secret life. We all have things that we are so ashamed of, so embarrassed with, we've kept them so secret for so long that we don't want to tell them to anybody. The framework that we learn is that you have to find a way to work through the public life into the private life, and then find your entry point into the secret life. Because once you get into a secret life of somebody, you essentially earn lifelong loyalty from them. Because so few people ever get into your secret life that the 1, 2, or 5, the very few that in your entire lifetime get into your secret life are people you will never forget. I know you have a girlfriend. She's been with you for 9 years. Is there any other girl in your mind that comes to memory that isn't your girlfriend?
Yeah, sure.
So that girl or those girls most likely broke into your secret life at some point. You let them into your secret life. Maybe your secret life when you were 13, maybe your secret life when you were 19, who knows? But you're going to turn 50 someday, and guess what?
Still there.
Still going to remember those girls. Remember that teacher from elementary school that was so impactful to you?
Yeah.
Got into your secret life.
Interesting.
Yep. Ever wonder why
So it's not even like super intimate details. It's just a certain like resonance. Huh, interesting.
Even you probably have 15 cousins, but you really only love or really like one or two of them, right? Most likely.
So how would you identify, how would you be able to pinpoint that you're in someone's secret life?
It's very hard.
Very subjective, I would assume.
It's very hard to know when you're in their secret life, because what somebody else finds as triggering, as like insecure or shameful or guilty, what they perceive as that is not always what you perceive as that. So you never really know when you're in their secret life. But what you can tell is when you've made it into their secret life, because when you've gotten into someone's secret life, they keep boomeranging back to you.
They feel like you're the person they want to tell stuff to because it feels good for them.
Because they feel safe.
Yeah.
Because now it's like you are basically as close to them as they are to themselves. So they're more vulnerable with you. They share their thoughts with you. They share their guilt and their shame with you. Like if someone's ever sat next to you, not someone, but like if you've ever had that moment where someone is like crying their heart out to you and you're feeling awkward about it, like this doesn't feel normal. That's a mismatch.
Yeah.
You think you're in private life. You're actually in secret life. They feel so safe and vulnerable that they are exposing their secret life to you. And you're kind of like,
I don't even know this person.
I don't really want to be here right now. Right? Not like a drunk person, but like generally speaking.
100%.
Yeah.
So this is like kind of the main objective for a CIA agent, essentially, because that's where you can influence people.
Because here's the thing. Nobody values somebody else's secret as much as they value their own secret. So let's say we're talking to a North Korean nuclear missile general, right? If I can get that North Korean general to talk to me about how his father sexually abused him when he was 11, that's a secret he doesn't want to tell anybody ever.
Yeah.
If I can get him to tell me that secret, I'm in his secret life. Now, when I ask him anything about North Korean nuclear missile secrets, nothing is going to compare to the molestation that his dad did to him when he was 11. So all day long, I can be like, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. Tell me about the nuclear codes here.
So you can inch that? Like, how do you inch at that?
How do you inch?
Like, inch towards that. If there's one specific piece of information you want, and you have the worst one on him.
You don't have to inch.
So if he'll go that vulnerable, anything
you can ask
will come out.
Essentially will come out.
Fascinating.
Exactly right.
So
you don't want, you still want to make it as easy as possible. So you want to be talking about like a relevant topic. You don't want to be talking to them at a time when they're emotionally compromised.
Right.
But essentially, anything's fair game. Just think about some of your closest friends. Think about anybody the people who are the closest to you in your private life. You can literally call them up out of nowhere and ask pretty much anything and know that they're going to answer it.
And then you're kind of, if you're really on top of it, you're going to make sure it's 10 a.m. They've just had their coffee. They're in their peak emotional state. And then you might be a little more forward about, or point the conversation one way and see where it goes.
You're going to create an artificial moment that's ideal for them to share with you what you're looking for.
Why does it feel so good to tell people a secret like that? Like, I feel like that's a weird thing between humans that we have.
It is. In part, it's because we are tribal creatures by nature. We're pack animals. Human beings are still animals. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I understand that we have a spiritual element and we're modeled after some God or Yahweh or whatever. I get it. If you're focused on all that, you're focused on the wrong thing. We are still
As a CIA agent,
biological animals.
Yes.
Right? Which means most animals herd or pack up in some way. We ourselves are pack animals, which means we like to be in packs that are efficient. We like to
spreading it is safety.
We like to bond with other animals that are strong where we believe we're weak. So what ends up happening is when you share those secrets with each other, you create a bond of where you're weak, and then the other person is strong where you're weak, so now you feel more survivable, so your survival instinct is satisfied because you feel more survivable because that person is strong where you are not.
Interesting. So it's like just sharing that. Now you have someone to bounce ideas off of. You just feel safer objectively.
You just feel safer objectively. Yeah. That's exactly it, right?
Interesting.
It's just like if you had good vision and I had good ears, like we should totally be in the same tribe. Because I need you to hunt during the day, and I'll keep us safe at night.
And it's kind of funny. You can subconsciously pick up on that without specifically being like he has good hearing, but there's something about him. You feel weak. You just feel more comfortable when he's there. And
we've all felt it before.
Yeah.
Like this is going back to the earlier part of our conversation when we were talking about like the subconscious. We don't trust the subconscious to just know what it's doing, but you can see how the subconscious is always working to give us the signal in the noise.
It's interesting that CIA like drilled anti-spirituality into you guys. Like everything that spirituality teaches, to be in touch with your soul, listen to your heart, operate off of feeling. It's like beaten out of you guys. And
because
that's
what
like,
is spirituality?
It's not dependable. It's very subjective.
And again, we're about to piss off everybody out there who goes to church.
I like spirituality, but
that's fine, right? But what was spirituality developed out of? The masses. And what are
you're talking religion?
Well.
The same thing, same realm.
Again, I love it when spirituality people are like, that's religion, and religious people are like, that's spirituality.
Religious people would say spirituality was propagandized and controlled.
There you go. So either way, if you start from the foundation that not higher level, but complex organizations of human people, right? Complex human bodies need to find a way to keep themselves alive. Whether that's a tax base or a donor base or a voter base, complex human organization needs dipshits to keep it afloat. So whether that's the church or whether that's the politics or whether that's an organization like CIA or whether it's Big Brothers, Big Sisters, everybody needs a pool of conditioned, like-minded mopes.
Conformed,
to keep it alive. That's the way it works. There's not a single thing wrong with that. There's not anything. The fact that the Catholic Church has been doing this efficiently for generations, there's not anything bad with the Catholic Church. The fact that the Protestant Church has been doing this the fact that the Jewish Church has been, there's not a single thing wrong with the fact that they have mastered the process of getting mopes and dopes to believe in something and hopefully make a larger contribution because of what they believe in. There's nothing wrong with that.
Observation.
But it's still a system of predictable behavior that people with high EQ and high empathy and anxiety, they can pull themselves out of that and tap into and use that same system for their own individual benefit in business, mental health, physical health, social friendships, and more.
And so the initial in to that world is first identifying those patterns, that system, studying the system, and then what is it, the RICE acronym? That's like the initial strategy.
The place to start with all of it is with RICE. RICE is the 4 core motivations that exist with all human beings of all ages, all races, all ethnicities, all educational backgrounds. Right? The 4 things that make a person tick: reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. What will you give me that makes me feel good? Because that will get me to take action. What do I believe in that makes me feel good? Because that will motivate me to take action.
Like a higher power told me to,
What am I afraid of?
Okay,
right.
Away from pain.
That's your C, right? Your reward was what do I like? Your I was what do I believe in? And your C is what am I afraid of? Coercion. What am I afraid of that gets me to take action? And then your E is your ego. What do I think about myself that gets me to take action?
That's like more status,
I mean, if you want to keep using the word status.
Keep it a theme. But then so you would essentially take one of those, like reward could be like you get a girl or it's going to give you a raise. And so you'd want to speak to that person in the language of their clear desire.
Right.
And so if you approach them with a decision tree, and then on the 6th question, you say something in the lines of, hey, and your messaging is, I'm going to help you get a raise.
Yep.
You don't say that with your words, but that's the message. Then they're going to engage in a conversation with you. You build rapport over time with the objective to get into their secret life.
There you go.
And that's how you get anything you want from anybody.
Correct. And what's really fascinating is, I mean, you got it. That's a great summary of the process, with the exception that getting into their secret life isn't always required. Because remember, when you get into someone's secret life, they never forget you. So if you want,
a little too deep.
If you want to be forgotten, you don't ever have to go that deep. Exactly right.
Fascinating.
You can always you can go right up close to it in private life and then get out. Think about just flashback to college. Flashback to your senior year in college. You probably had multiple friends. You also probably know that of these close friends that you would have said you had your senior year in college, you don't remember them all.
Mm-mm. I'm not even that far removed, and they're gone, you know?
But that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Like, how is it that you had a bunch of close friends, but you can't remember any of them fuckers?
Maybe two, yeah.
It's because of that whole concept of private life and secret life. They never made it into your secret life, so they're not memorable.
Intimate details, so they just fade away.
And then in 10 years from now, you're going to remember them even less than you remember them now.
That's wild. Do you guys practice body language at all?
All the time.
Could I hear some frameworks on body language?
Body language, verbal cues, nonverbal cues, tonality, all of that stuff, right? The thing to understand is that we're, again, applying it from a very operational, practical way. It's not like when you watch some of these TikTok people and Instagram people who are talking about micro expressions. What we're talking about is like very practical body language cues. Like in this instant, you are leaning forward. That shows that you are interested. You also have your arms crossed. Crossed arms is generally a sign of some kind of rejection or blocking, right? So maybe we're having a topic of conversation that's interesting to you, but maybe you're feeling a little bit removed or distant. Maybe it's because you're tired, or maybe it's because you're watching the clock, or maybe it's because you're just trying to go through a list of things that you want to talk about to make good short clips out of. Who knows? But you can see in the body language what's happening there, right? Like you can tell when people have their legs crossed or their arms crossed. You can see whether the head is cocked or whether their head is straight on, when they're leaning back. There's all sorts of different body language cues.
What does that mean? What does the head cocked mean?
Head cock can mean that they're thinking about something else instead of listening to you.
Damn, I'm doing a horrible job. Transferring body language is funny.
But that's what's so useful about it. And again, it's not smoking gun. It's not like a silver bullet for sure, because I don't know your baseline. For all I know, this is what you're like all the time. Right? For all I know, right now you're on your second Red Bull and you're hyper-caffeinated, and this is nothing like you. Or maybe you're on your second Red Bull and you're hyper-caffeinated, and this is exactly what you're like all the time. I don't know because I don't have a baseline.
What does legs crossed mean?
Legs crossed is just like arms crossed. It's another sign of some kind of distancing, right? Okay. I don't want to get too close. I don't want to be trusting.
So if my palms are out towards you, what does that mean?
I mean, this is not a normal thing.
Unless you're Trump.
But open arms is open,
yeah.
Right? You got to keep in mind that the subconscious energy center of your body is your chest.
Okay.
Your lungs are here. Your heart is here, right? Your stomach is here. Like, this is a lot of vulnerable stuff, but it's also a lot of what drives your body, right? Your lungs drive oxygen to your brain. Your heart pumps blood through your whole system. Your stomach is essentially the engine of your whole body. So this is like the center of energetic activity in your body, not in a woo-hooey way, but in a true biological way.
Yeah.
Right. So when you open this to people, subconsciously what you're saying is that you trust people with these vulnerable parts of your body. And when you don't trust people with that.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you said woohoo stuff. Is that like aura and like
hippie stuff?
Yeah.
Like all of your chakras.
Do they not teach you that stuff?
I mean,
do they acknowledge that?
They acknowledge that there are people who believe in it.
Okay.
And then they acknowledge that there's loose science to support some elements of it, but it's not practical yet. Right?
So I swear I could feel, like, if my girlfriend's anxious in bed, like I swear I'll feel like getting tint on this side.
How long have you been together?
Like 9 years.
It's not because of her anxiety that you feel it. It's because you've been together for 9 years.
And so I just, what?
You have all sorts of subconscious verbal and nonverbal cues.
So she could be like emitting like a certain tone in her voice, and my body's picking it up, essentially.
Well, your ears, right?
Yeah.
You could just see it. You see that when she feels, my wife is the same way. My wife has general anxiety disorder. I know, like, I can see it on her skin because she'll sweat and she'll get oily. So when she's going through a moment of anxiety, I can literally see the extra shine on her face, and I'm like, she's feeling something.
But are you consciously seeing that?
I'm like consciously, meaning I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
But I see it, and then I know what it means.
How do they train you on subconscious versus conscious mind?
What they really train you to do is distrust your subconscious mind.
Interesting.
And focus on conscious observables. that allow you to create meaningful assessments about what's happening. Because if your subconscious is wrong most of the time, right? Because it's based on your feelings, because you've got 5 senses, and because the vast majority of data that you're collecting at any given time is emotional or based on some sort of feeling sensation. So you can't trust it, but it's still data. So you've heard of catching the signal through the noise.
Yeah.
Most of the information that you're collecting at any given point is noise.
Right.
So the way that you find the signal in the noise is by being able to apply layers of rational thought over irrational feelings.
And they don't teach you anything like meditation or anything like that.
We do learn about meditation. The primary form of meditation that's really promoted at CIA is Transcendental meditation, which is a specific type of meditation that's like really became popular in the 1970s. And it's all about essentially syncing the left and right hemispheres and the frontal and paleomammalic regions of the brain. So if you think about the human brain has like 6 regions, but you can basically break it into left, right, front, back. When your brain is in sync, you have electrical connections that are firing simultaneously across hemispheres in a proper way. Just think of it like if you've ever had a bike lock where you have to line up the numbers on the bike lock to get it to open. If the numbers, you might have the right numbers showing, but if they're just a little bit off, the bike lock won't open, right? It's the same way with your brain. So what Transcendental meditation does is it syncs your brain. Like the process of that meditation gets your left and right hemispheres to connect, your front and rear hemispheres to connect, and then you have a efficient, synchronized brain. And in the process of syncing the brain, it's also creating a sensation of increased energy in the body. It's not actually creating a new energy, because new energy is calories. It's just creating a sensation of increased energy because it's capturing efficiencies in how the brain works. So it's technical, but it's a more effective, more faster to train, easier to learn. Like you don't really ever master it. You just get more and more efficient at it. But it's also the kind of meditation that you can do in like 15 minutes anywhere. It doesn't require quiet. It doesn't require some fancy lotus pose. It doesn't require chakras or meditations. Or nobody has to guide you through it. It's different.
Just mental in your head? Like you're going through like a rehearsed speech? Or
close. I mean, it's a mantra. Like Transcendental meditation at its core is just a phrase that has no meaning. Right? Think about like the word Kodak. Kodak was chosen for the Kodak camera company, Kodak film company, because it had no meaning in any language, but it was easy to pronounce in every language. So that's how they found the word Kodak. In a mantra for Transcendental meditation, you are given a mantra that's a lot like Kodak. It has no meaning, but you can say it in any language. And then you just repeat that mantra to yourself for a set period of time, and the goal is to repeat the mantra quiet, like in your own head, not with your mouth, but repeat it in your own head while you push it further and further back into your subconscious.
Like you're imagining it deeper?
You're imagining it deeper. You're imagining it quieter. You're imagining it slower. And that whole process of like singular focus on a word that has no meaning, what that does is it keeps your left and your right brain from competing over what's the meaning of that word and what's the value of that word. Instead, it's just a sound that everything focuses on, and it brings the hemispheres in sync.
Cool. And you just have like 15 minutes. I'll look that up. Yeah. This is a random question, but you mentioned movies. Did CIA work with Walt Disney? Is that like a public thing?
I don't know.
If you
I wouldn't be surprised if they worked with Disney.
If you did, but you weren't allowed to say it, would your answer be, I don't know?
No, if I did and I had an answer, my answer would be that I couldn't tell you.
Okay, thank you.
CIA is a secret organization. People just need to fucking suck it up.
That's the point.
That's the point. Yeah. It is a secret organization. You're not allowed to know what they know. Yes, they know more than you. Yes, what they know would scare you. Yes, what they know would give you an advantage in your business and your personal life, and they're still not going to tell you because they are truly classified secrets. Now, a classified secret by law has to fit a certain definition, because CIA is still part of a bureaucracy. It's still part of a law, a legal system. CIA falls under the executive branch, which is one of the 3 branches of government. All 3 branches of government operate according to checks and balances. CIA is in the executive branch. That means there are people in the judicial branch and people in the legislative branch who are able to see the secrets at CIA to keep it in check and balance. But that doesn't mean that you, the American person, gets to have access to any of that. You have to trust that the right judges and the right legal bodies and the right representatives in the House and in Congress and in the Senate, that the right people have the right access to keep everything in check and balance. Because we don't believe that, we believe there's a deep state.
Yeah.
And the deep state is somehow this combination of people who have violated all the checks and balances in our systems, and they are now working in cahoots against us as the people and against the head executive of the country. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's hard enough to get the fucking government to work right. How are you going to get a shadow government to not only work, but work in complete secret?
So you're under the opinion that no one's in control, and that's even scarier.
The economy is in control.
Yeah, okay.
And that's predictable. Like, I'm not scared of the future of the United States. I feel like we have a lot of data to pull a very healthy assessment about what the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 9 years, 10 years, what's going to look like. I think when we look at what the next 10 years is going to look like, we all poop in our pants a little bit because it looks pretty shitty.
Yeah.
But we need to just accept that that's what it looks like instead of trying to assume that we're going to all be saved someday when we find out who really shot JFK or when we uncover the deep state. Because that's not how it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm no Tucker Carlson, so this is not my domain of expertise at all. But I am curious, do you think the new trend in a globalist world will be just hopping for like affluent people to just hop like to the next safest country? Like Dubai is the new place for young and upcoming people. And do you think that's a negative attitude to have if you're trying to save America in a way?
Well, first of all, I think that you're already kind of one season behind.
Mm-hmm.
The last 5 years has really been defined by wealthy people hopping to different countries.
So that's probably going to be, instead of trying to bunker down to save just the wealthy people will just go to the one place. It seems like they make the most.
They're already doing that, is what I'm saying.
Have they been doing that for 50 years, I assume?
They've been doing that for like the last 10.
10.
Yeah. I mean, there's wealthy people either already have property abroad, and this is wealthy people anywhere in the world. They either already have property abroad, or they have investments abroad that can be liquidated into property, or they have some kind of service that will evacuate them abroad in the event that they need to. That's generally how it works, right? And then it's everybody else who doesn't have affluence, who's kind of stuck wherever they are, doing whatever they do. And you mentioned the trend in a globalized world. I think the real trend is that as we move forward, we're going to become less globalized. Because globalization, COVID highlighted the weaknesses of globalization. Because remember, when COVID struck, it was identified in China first. And then China shut down. And when China shut down, the secondary effect all over the world was significant. Shipping, manufacturing, production, plastics, all telecommunication, tons of things started shutting down all over the world because China shut down. What happened is the whole world woke up to, this is the problem with globalization. And then the United States started moving in the direction of diversifying supply chains. It became a big thing in 2022-ish, right? Where now it's like, we can still get 60% of our production from China, but then the other 40% needs to come from someplace else. It needs to come through Latin America, or it needs to come from the Far East, or it needs to come from Oceania, something like that, right? But we can't make ourselves dependent on a single supply chain. Globalization has been what's led to our rise over the last, say, 20 to 40 years. Moving forward, the reason there's such a movement towards populist right-wing governments all over the world is because people don't trust globalization anymore. But that's temporary, right? Just like we were isolationist before we joined World War II, we're going back towards an isolationist phase now, but that's just a swinging pendulum.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, not my domain, but that was a new perspective for me. So I guess I want to ask you, just out of my own interest, I'm really into psychology. I really like reading body language, EQ, this whole category of things. Now, do you guys study the concept of ego development, identifying where someone's own subconscious or cognitive development has, at what point they're at based on their value and belief system? Do you categorize people based off of that level? Like, how are you categorizing people? Like, can you pick up on a value system that they have? Have you ever heard of spiral dynamics?
So I like where you're going with this, and I feel like it's a great chance to bust a myth about CIA, right? CIA specialize, intelligence agencies in general that work in the field of human intelligence, or collecting secrets from human beings, we don't focus on psychology. Like we use tools that have been developed through the science of psychology, but we don't get into the academic nature of psychology, because everything we do has to be pragmatic and practical with an operational focus. Think of it like applied psychology. And I think that's really important, because there's lots of people who are interested in psychology. So lots of psychology majors out there, right? And there's a reason that most people who have studied or mastered or invested themselves into psychology don't do much with it. Because the focus around most psychology is academic. Fucking spiral dynamics? How do you turn that into money? How do you turn that into an advantage on the battlefield? How do you turn that into some sort of competitive secret in business or in national security? You can't. And even like there's layer upon layer of psychological principle that is clinical, academic, medical, factual, but just not practical.
So that's why you have the rice, the secret life. Okay.
We have all these frameworks that we use at CIA that basically
based on that
pull on the science, but make it actionable.
Yeah.
Because even if you could, like, just think about what you were talking about with categorizing egos. Even if you could categorize egos in a practical, pragmatic, operational way, why? Why spend real tax dollars in real time categorizing egos at all, when all you want at the end of the day is for a person who has access to secrets that advanced national security priorities, all you want is for them to give you those secrets. So do I need to categorize you as XYZ or anything else? No. All I need to know is you have secrets, and you tell me those secrets when I help you get laid, or when I help you get booze, or when I take you away from your kids, or whatever it might be, right? Very, very focused and pragmatic. The movies make it look like CIA officers are like superheroes and super smart and special and talented and everything, and we're not. We're just normal, everyday people who have learned a literal set of skills that we can use to get the kind of advantage that keeps America the world's only superpower.
That's a really good insight, how it's like action focused. And they only are going to train you on it if they have like a clear cut like simplification of it in a pragmatic situation.
Yep. One of the biggest problems that happens outside of CIA is people get so into trying to become a master of something. Like, you see it all the time. Like, how many people have you met that want to be entrepreneurs, but they never actually just take action?
Do it, yeah.
Most people. They've got business plans. They've got notes.
They started the LLC.
Yeah, they've got all this stuff.
Yeah.
But they never just tried to sell the product they had. They never tried to just take their product to market.
They watch every business podcast.
And they spend tons of money. They'll spend money on
bought
books.
The courses, yeah.
They'll spend money on Vistaprint cards, right? And they'll have 6,000 cards sitting on their shelf, not getting handed out, right? Like, they'll do everything except actually take action to do the thing they want to do. Where, in contrast, the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs I've ever met never did any of the other planning. They literally were just like, I think I could sell lemonade with grenadine in it. And then they tried it, and it worked, and then they sold. And now they have whatever, White Claw. Right?
That's fascinating. I want to ask you, do you have any advice for those people to get past that? Like,
I do. So, I mean, I love talking to entrepreneurs, because what's happening is something called analysis paralysis. It's a very real thing. It happens at CIA too. You are trying to analyze a situation so closely that you lose track of understanding the high impact part versus the low impact part of your outcome. So when you're focused on an issue that has high impact, it's worth your energy, because the outcome is going to have high impact. So is it worth it to change your product and physically try a new prototype? Yes, that's a high impact change. Once you have a working prototype, is it worth it to keep analyzing your working prototype and then improving it 5 and 10%? No. It's better to take your prototype to market and get people to start buying the early prototype. This is what your tech companies have done so well. This is what Android or Google and Apple and Samsung and Sony, the thing they always do, and the thing they still do to this day that is so, so smart, is once they have a minimal viable product, MVP, they take it to market.
Speaking my language.
And once that MVP is out there, you're making money.
And getting feedback.
And getting feedback, which helps inform how you're going to improve it in the future. But guess who gets to choose when you improve it? You do. So if you have something that's 85% good and it's got a 7% refund rate and it just keeps on selling, put $0 fucking dollars into making it better. Just keep selling it because clearly people want it. Now, when your refund rate creeps up to like 30% and 1 out of every 3 that you produce gets sent back, now maybe it's time to peel off some of that marketing money and spend it on improving the product. But what ends up happening is people are like, oh, I've got a good product out there and I'm selling it and I've got like a 7% refund rate, but I'm still holding back to make it better and better and better and better. Like you can't do that. The 2 pieces of guidance that I always give entrepreneurs is get to the MVP, sell the MVP. Marketing is MVP. So sell the minimum viable product with the minimum viable marketing. Your cost structure and who you hire and the business and everything is all MVP. Everything is minimum viable to get it out there. And then once it's working, maximize sales and maximize revenue because you'll be able to turn that revenue into something else that makes the process of the product better, not the product itself. So first, get to the MVP of the MVP of the MVP. Second, understand that just by getting to the MVP, you're beating 80% of the competition that's out there. 80% of the competition won't even start. So you've got to get to the MVP phase so that you can start making revenue and cash flow because once you're there, you have an advantage. You have a head start over the next person who's going to wake the fuck up and make an MVP of an MVP of an MVP. The only advantage you have over that person is how fast and how long you've been in the market. Another great example, iPhone was the first smartphone to market. It has lost a shit ton of market share to Android. And it lost that not at the beginning, it lost that even after having such a huge head start in the smartphone industry. And that's because Apple had its own issues. But everybody remembers when iPhone was the only option. Everybody remembers when Android first came out and people were like, like a Samsung phone that's on a different operating system. And now, like, Apple has to compete to maintain its current market share.
Especially different countries. Interesting. So I feel like for me, a big problem is I always will come up with a story in my head of why something is like the right thing to do. And I'll think through the entire process. Like, this is going to be the best 2-year strategy here. And then I just have like confirmed this, but then I'm constantly slotting in pieces of it instead of like actually pounding through 3 months of the work that needs to be done.
Yes.
Is there any sort of framework that you guys have or that you had? I guess that doesn't necessarily apply to the CIA, but is there a framework in that field that you could think of that would help get past that?
So it very much applies to CIA. So it's essentially incremental improvement, but I'm forgetting what the spy jargon is for it, right? But it's essentially the idea, there's a quote out there by a famous general that says a good plan executed today is better than a great plan executed next week. And that's how we operate all the time. Because the market or the world will tell you whether or not your theory is correct very quickly. So when you first step out on a battlefield, you'll know very quickly whether or not your strategy is sound or not sound. Another saying that we have is great plans never survive first contact with the enemy. Have you heard of either of those?
I've heard both those.
So very, very true. These are lessons forged under fire on the battlefield. Well, guess what the business world is? It's a battlefield constantly. And it has a million different variables. When you storm a beach, you've got to think about the weather the day that you storm the beach, the weather the day after you storm the beach, if the weather's going to change, whether it's daytime or nighttime, what the enemy's capabilities are, what your capabilities are, what their tools are, what your tools are, where they're stationed and their locations are, there's a million variables to consider. Are there trees? Is there sand? Is it clay? Is it dirt? Like all this stuff plays into the calculation of how you attack a beach. The same shit is true when you launch a business. There's a million variables you can't control. What technology is dominant? What technology is emerging? What is the tax landscape? What is the currency landscape? What is going to happen with geopolitics? What's going to happen with local politics? What if there's another coffee shop down the street that's going to open 2 days before you do? What if there's another coffee street?
The risk analysis, yeah.
It's all there. You can't control it all. You can't assess it all. What you need to do is understand that if you can be the first one to the battlefield to get the ground truth, with it in your mind that you're then going to change your strategy as soon as you get the ground truth, you have an advantage, right? A good plan executed now is better than a great plan executed next week, because the great plan executed next week is a full week behind where the battle is today.
So as Everyday Spy, is this like a consulting company? Is it like are you working with top performers in the world to like help them understand how to navigate people? Or kind of explain Everyday Spy?
Everyday Spy is an education platform. Our mission is spy education that breaks barriers for everyone willing to learn. As long as it doesn't violate my long-term secrecy agreement, me or any of my experts, because I have FBI experts, Navy SEAL experts, I have tech experts from NSA, I have DOD experts. As long as none of us violate our sworn secrecy oath to the federal government of the United States, everything else is on the table. So we teach, educate people in those frameworks and skills, just like we talked about earlier.
Okay.
To help them break whatever barrier they have. And some people, the barrier they're trying to break is lose weight. Some people, the barrier they're trying to break is a better relationship with their kids or their spouse. Some people, the barrier they're trying to break is getting a promotion in their current job. Other people, their barrier is trying to get out of a job and get into entrepreneurialism. Some entrepreneurs are trying to go from 1 million to 2 million. Some entrepreneurs are trying to go from 100 million to 500 million. We apply spy education to whatever their situation is to break through that barrier.
So it's actually teaching those actionable frameworks. I didn't realize that.
That's exactly right.
For some reason, I thought it was for business owners.
It is for business owners.
But yeah, exactly. It applies to them.
Correct.
But it's just general spy tactics, what you've learned in the CIA, that's actionable, simplified frameworks.
Yes, and I wouldn't even say that it's general spy tactics, because depending on what barrier is trying to be broken, we can get very specialized with our spy tactics. We have a high net worth client who runs a very successful $1 company in an industry that is relatively new. Let's say the last 10 or 15 years became a very hot industry. Because the industry is so hot, the competition between the players hasn't been heavily regulated. So there's a lot of cyber hacking and cyber attacks that happen back and forth, right? So in the world of espionage, cyber espionage is pretty niche. It's not like I don't see a lot of value in creating a special report that I give away for free on YouTube about cyber hacking principles.
Yeah.
But for this specific client,
huge impact.
So we are able to advise and then operationalize both defensive and operational, so both defensive and offensive cyber operations to support and defend his company against the attacks of his competitors. But because it's an unregulated market, we can also offensively attack his competition using cyber technology that's more refined and advanced than theirs.
So what is the CIA's perspective on Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is a practical tool. Bitcoin is a practical tool. Shitbirds use it. Bad guys use it all over the world.
Shitbird.
And you have to understand that that's how the federal government sees it. So because Bitcoin is used to fund terrorist operations, human trafficking operations, weapons smuggling operations, Bitcoin people love to look past this, but the truth is all of the initial use cases for Bitcoin were all nefarious. When all of your primary use cases were nefarious, that's what CIA believes. That's what the federal government believes. It's a nefarious tool. Do we still use it? Hell yes. Because if you need to get a nefarious actor on your side, do you want to use real US dollars? No.
They
want to use fake money. Unregulated cryptocurrencies,
digital gold,
that are basically only as valuable as the speculation around them. That's not something that federal governments rely on.
It seems like there's a non-emotional relationship to it. Like they can acknowledge that what it's being used for, and then use it for that, if that ends justify the means for whatever they're trying to achieve.
It's not the ends justify the means. It's economics, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. So let's say you're CIA and you have a $1 trillion budget. Okay. When you take down this drug smuggler, you arrest them, send them to Guantanamo Bay, and you seize all their assets. Well, part of the assets you just seized are $15 million in cryptocurrency through Bitcoin, right? So now you have $1 trillion in US dollars and $15 million in Bitcoin dollars. You can't trade your 15 million Bitcoin to get US dollars because that's making a profit off of national security work, and it just doesn't work that way, right? But
so you're interesting.
Now you're just $15 million as an organization. You're $15 million richer in your operational fund. So now, when it comes time to buy a Ukrainian tank that costs $11 million, if the Ukrainians will let you buy that tank in Bitcoin, are you going to spend part of your $1 trillion budget, or are you going to spend part of your $15 million Bitcoin seize? You're going to spend that Bitcoin first. And now you've just protected U.S. tax dollars.
Interesting.
And that's how it goes. So now it's like, if on a smaller scale, you get $500,000 in Bitcoin value from this interdiction operation, and then you turn it over to the FBI, who uses it for this child trafficking bust. And then DEA gains 50 million or 50,000 Bitcoin from this child trafficker or this drug trafficker, and they hand it over to NSA, who uses it to pay off an informant in Baluchistan, whatever it might be.
Yes, okay, so it's used objectively as a utility.
Correct, because we know that it has no value for the federal government, and we know that it's already blood money, so you got to keep it on the blood side of the...
Would the same thing be like for drug money that's in USD? Like, is that still categorized, or is that still meshed in?
Well, not just drug money that's USD, but any money that's seized that's USD. If it's child trafficking dollars, if it's fraudulent business dollars, whatever else, it all comes back. Have you ever seen a situation where, like, a New York City police or Chicago police or whatever, they have a big raid?
Yeah.
And then they have a big press conference, and on the table is like piles of cocaine and piles of dollars.
Yeah.
Well, the piles of cocaine get sent to the incinerator. Piles of dollars can't be put into normal rotation.
Yeah.
So instead, they're granted back to the police department for use in other police department functions, whatever that might be. Like, essentially, it's a legal version of laundering money. Right?
What, can they use it to buy equipment or just... Oh, okay. So they can still use it to buy stuff. Okay, cool.
Because it's real U.S. dollars. It's real currency that's owned by that's recognized by the federal government.
Interesting. Right? Okay, cool. So I always would wonder if they acknowledge that Bitcoin is like a super valuable asset and they were trying to like acquire. Okay, cool.
It's an investment. It's an investment vehicle. That's all it is.
Yeah,
and what you can't do is leverage, and you can't leverage your government granted. You can't take tax budget and use it to make an investment.
You left like 10 years ago, probably around up there, right? And then did you have in mind that you would go start a business afterward?
No, actually. When I left CIA, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I left for family reasons because I had my first child. My wife and I were both CIA officers. CIA basically they had a conversation with us where they were like, hey, you're going to have to choose between being CIA officers or being parents. Not like they're going to get rid of our kid, but it's basically like, you're not going to be home because you're going to be operating, or you are going to be home and you're not going to be operating. But they were like, this is the way it works, and this is the way it's always worked at CIA. Well, this is 2014. My wife and I are both 34 years old with our first child, and we want to have a second child. And we were just of the first generation that basically heard that offer, and we were kind of like, well, then fuck you guys, we're out. And like when we left in 2014, CIA had really never seen that before. People who leave mid-career because they started having a family was unfamiliar to them. The attrition rate prior to 2014 was like in the low 2%. It was like 1.8%, 1.6%. Very few people ever left CIA. And when they did leave, it was because they were retiring, and then they went through what was called a revolving door. Retire on Friday, come back in on Monday as a contractor working for some big contract company. That was basically how people would retire. So they were not accustomed to mid-career successful professionals just leaving.
What's the point of becoming a contractor? What's the difference? Like
$60,000 a year.
You get paid more or less?
You get paid a ton more. Do you remember when Donald Trump, when he took office in 2016, for like 2 years after that, he tried to start taking security clearances from anybody who wasn't in government? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He was 100% right. Because what happens is you don't make very much money in the federal government. And when I say you don't make very much money, what I mean is like a senior intelligence specialist or an SIS officer might be making maybe $210,000 a year after a 30-year career. Well, shit, dude. Like, you know how many 28-year-old salespeople are making $250,000 a year right now? Like,
you know, 20-year-olds that have made $1 million a month sitting in that seat.
Exactly, right? So after a full year of servicing the government, for $210,000 being your greatest salary ever, you have these super high secrecy, or you have the super high clearance. You have a huge network of peers at CIA, at FBI, at DOD and DIA, at NSA, and abroad with the Israelis, and with the French, and with the Germans, and with the British. Like, you have this giant network. Well, a corporate for-profit company wants access to that network. Your Booz Allen Hamiltons and your Raytheons and your
Gotcha.
Khakis,
I see what you mean. Okay.
right?
Yeah,
so then they'll come in and they'll make offers to the retirees, and then the retiree will step out on Friday, without being an employee for CIA anymore, sign on with CACI or sign on with Booz Allen Hamilton or Raytheon, sign a receipt to start getting a $370,000 salary, but all they're doing is they're essentially brokering introductions and contracts with whoever's still inside the building. It should absolutely be illegal. It should be totally outlawed. It's absolutely all the problems with abusing the federal system, but it's always been overlooked because the government and the national security sector sees it as an opportunity to capitalize on the best parts of business without having to get clearance from the people in the business. They've already granted clearance to the people on the inside.
We're back to self-interest, huh? So then I'm curious if other people, because you kill it on podcasts.
Thank you.
Like, so fascinating. And I'm trying not to ask the same questions because I've watched probably like 5 of yours, so like before I even contacted you. But I am like very curious if other people have tried to, other CIA agents have tried to copy your business, because I'm assuming you're doing very well for yourself.
Yeah, we are in a blue market, like in a blue ocean market. It's been pretty awesome. To my knowledge, nobody has tried to mimic us yet. There's a couple of different reasons why. One, remember how we talked about taking that first step and building that head start? We also call it a moat in business terminology. You build a moat around your castle. We have a pretty deep, big moat. So for someone to even try to...
Just for how long you've been at the business?
Right. But just like Apple, right, just like the iPhone, it's not guaranteed. Like there could be a competitor that comes in and poaches some of our space. But just by virtue of the fact that we started earlier than anybody else with a message that nobody had ever heard before, doing something in the spy education space that no one's ever seen before, we've had this huge head start. And we're trying to maintain and keep that head start always. Right? That's the mission of the company. Everybody from me through my president to all of my employees and staff, everybody knows like our job is to just keep pushing the ball forward to build that moat and keep that head start. Someday there will be a competitor who steps out and tries. It's going to happen. They'll be better looking than me, they'll speak better than me, they'll be smarter than me, and they'll be more relevant because they will have gotten out and they won't be as old, right? They'll be younger, they'll be fresher, they'll be cooler. Good chance they'll also find an investor. Like our business is cash flow funded. We've never had outside investment. When a competitor comes out, all it's going to take is someone infusing $5 or $7 million into their company, and they're going to have the ability to buy all the media that we've earned. Right? So we've always got to be prepared for when that comes. But so far that competition hasn't presented itself. So every single day we're building more moat and getting more of a head start.
So do you think that because they hire a very specific type of people, do you think that those people just naturally don't fall in line with entrepreneurship, or do you think they're like perfectly in line with entrepreneurship and they just don't leave?
I think they are perfectly in line with entrepreneurship, and they believe the brainwashing that happens at CIA.
It's like, this is almost like the concept of setting culture in a business.
Kind of, yeah.
Like, you need to understand. I wonder, dang, that's so interesting. So that's the same thing as hiring. Like, they know exactly who to hire, so then they get the exact same culture setting that they know would work to get this, essentially an employee, yeah?
That's what's so hard about communicating these techniques to business owners, is that the reason CIA does so well is because it goes all the way back to hiring. They have a specific technique for hiring, and then for training, and then for cultivating training and building a community. We have this thing called the indoctrination circles. They're concentric circles that indoctrinate. It's a whole methodology that CIA has, that we use all over the world, that I teach to business owners. This is one of the things that I teach to like executives, right? How to create a systematic indoctrination cycle so that you can go from having just a brand new employee to having like a true blue believer in the why of the company, like the mission, the vision, and the objective of the company, right? And their position and where they fit in that whole thing. Because it's a process, but it's a fulsome process. It's not the kind of thing you can do in 48 hours. It's the kind of thing that you have to cultivate somebody over 9-ish months of their career to get them to that place. Your typical fucking entrepreneur is so focused on culture that they lose track of the core business. Like, we're all trying to make our people happy. Happy people are not a requirement to keep a business alive. Cash flow is a requirement to keep a business alive. You can always take somebody who understands cash flow first and teach them a new culture. But what you cannot do is find somebody who puts culture first and train them to put cash flow first. You can't do that. So what ends up happening is a lot of good business owners find themselves wasting money and wasting time on fucking shitty employees who are really part of the company because they believe in the culture. Well, they can believe in the culture all day long. If they don't believe in the core purpose and core product of the company, they're not going to generate the kind of wealth for the company that's required to scale the company, grow the company, and keep the company alive.
Interesting. So are you teaching people to identify a certain type of personality type?
Yep. That's something we do all the time.
What is the type?
There's multiple. It depends on the job.
Oh,
it depends on the company, the role, the task order. Like it depends on a lot of different things. If you have a career, or if you have a company where people need to be focused on cognitively challenging tasks where they have to work alone because they're working remotely or something like that, and you need them to solve complex challenges, now you're looking for somebody who's a certain personality type that's a mix of introvert, data-focused, and process-oriented. If you're dealing in a company that's more growth-oriented, and what you're trying to do is get people to think creatively about how to pitch and sell a product to a wider new audience with multiple types of variations, now you want somebody who's more extroverted, who thinks more intuitively about opportunities, and for somebody who's probably less on the process side and more on the experimental side.
How would you find out someone's intuitively looking for opportunities?
Well, you would have to look at their personality profile. So you'd have to put them through a personality battery. So some kind of personality test.
Is that like a Myers-Briggs, or is it?
Myers-Briggs is the go-to test for the federal government. It's the most pragmatic of all the intelligence tests out there. Like your DISC profile and your there's like dozens and dozens of these things now, right? There's all these different personality testing tools. Myers-Briggs has the longest history with the least variation in factual responses or factual outcomes. So that's why pragmatically, going back to the whole idea of everything we do is practical, Myers-Briggs is the go-to solution for the federal government.
Okay. I'm sure that's like a whole world.
That's a whole world.
Yeah.
And all of the academic psychologists out there are pitching a fit and pissing at themselves right now, right? Because they're like, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And I'm like, look, guys, whether you like it or
Just
not.
put it in English, yeah.
Yeah, Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
Four letters. Everybody speaks the same language. 80% done is good enough.
Make it practical.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, Andrew, thank you so much, dude.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I was very nervous because I was super excited for it, and I had so many like actual questions that I'm interested in. But I think we tied this up pretty nicely. So
great, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
Dude.
If anybody wants to find me, they can find me at everydayspy.com. They can follow my podcast, the Everyday Spy Podcast. You can find me on social media at Everyday Spy. And I mean, this is what I live to do, man. I live to teach people about how to take spy skills and spy education and use it to break a barrier. Social barrier, personal barrier, professional barrier, entrepreneurial barrier, and teach that to them and share them so they can have success. Because the future isn't being created by the dipshits out there. Our future is literally being built and written by the people who can pull themselves out of the average and do something extraordinary.
So do you think that is what you're working towards, like helping people become aware? Like that's what you're, at the end of the day? Like
at the end of the day, I am working to help the 5%. Remember how we talked about the 80-20 and the 80-20? Yeah. The 120-minute long interview that turns into 24 memorable minutes, of which only 5 of them are really positive. That's 5%, that 20% of the 20%. That's what I live for. That's the true calling for the company. Because if you take all 100% of the people who I'm going to touch, 80% of them won't like me because I'm former CIA. I'm brown, I'm male. There's 1,000 reasons not to like me. I use bad words and I call people dipshits.
You're checking all the boxes.
I don't need 80% to like me. I need 20% to hear and agree with what I'm saying. And then of that 20%, 80% are going to hear and agree and do dick all with it. They're going to keep fucking masturbating and clipping their nails and doing nothing with their lives.
Yeah.
But 20% of them will do something amazing, right? So when it all boils down to it, it's 5 minutes of 120 minutes. It's like 500 people out of 25 million people. I don't care. That's what it's all about. It's all about changing those lives because those 5 minutes, that 20% of 20%, that which I think comes out to like 6% of people, that group is going to shape the future. Those are the people who are going to be the future's millionaires, the future's politicians, the future's leaders. the future generals. That's who that group is. Absolutely, I want to do everything I can to enable that group to shape the future, because that's the future for my children.
That's beautiful, man. I see the comment section. There's all these scientists and people who are just hone in on one thing you say, and they're like trying to criticize or discredit you. And I'm like sitting there just absolutely glued to every minute of what you're saying. And it's just super practical and helpful for my life. So
awesome.
Thanks for what you're doing, brother.
Any day, man.